Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 8. And this week we're reading we're reading chapter 9, excuse me, on informal reports. And then next week, which is week 9, weeks 9 and 10 are going to be combined because fall break is in there, so we don't have a full week. And next week, we're really going to be applying some of the things that we're learning this week by locating an article from the library database and then writing a report that's a summary of it. So I'm going to try to highlight as I go through the chapter here some of the things that are going to be most important for the following weeks, for weeks 9 and 10. Okay, so this chapter is all about different kinds of reports. So analytical reports, their organizational strategies and writing styles. There are a lot of reasons why in a workplace situation you might be writing a report to keep your manager informed about completed task projects and works in progress, to help a boss like quickly sift through a lot of information, which is what we're going to do next week, starting next week, with finding an article that would be of interest to them, but giving them the highlights. And then there's a lot of ways to give report findings. So, for example, for the General Education Committee, we produced both a written report and a PowerPoint to share the outcomes that we got from looking at student artifacts. So there's kind of multiple ways that a report might be disseminated. The main purpose of business reports are several things. One, to convey information. So here's the information you wanted about how the gen ed program is meeting its outcomes, to answer your questions, or to solve problems. So, for example, the City of Havre Fire Department building has asbestos in the ceiling, and it's a problem that needs a solution, and there are probably several solutions at different costs and issues that come with that, whatever the solution is for getting rid of asbestos. And so I might have a report that has, here's the best solution, or here's comparing 3 solutions, something like that. Two main type of report functions. One is informational, so just to present data without analysis. So for example, when I was an undergrad and I worked in the library, I would print out each month a monthly report of all the books that had been purchased in different subject areas. And it didn't have any analysis to it. It was just like, here's the list. So people could look through it and kind of see, okay, what have we added, right, in these different collections? So they're routine and often periodic, so that was monthly, and present data without recommendations. It's raw data, so that's data that you could do something with, but the report itself is just a list of the raw data. And then analytical reports provide data or findings, analyses, and conclusions. So again, if I was comparing 3 solutions for mitigating the asbestos problem in the fire department, that would be making a recommendation, or trying to persuade readers why we should go with one method, maybe over another. Maybe one is safer and has more long-term benefits, even though it's a little bit more costly, for example. There are 2 ways that you can organize a report. For our purposes, for what we're going to be doing starting next week, we're going to look at the direct strategy because we're assuming that the boss is informed, supportive, and wants the information. They're actually asking for this. If I was going to a board that was deciding what to do about the asbestos problem in the firehouse, I would use a direct strategy because that's what they're looking for. They don't want a big preamble. But if you were dealing with an issue that maybe people needed to be persuaded on. So I'm thinking in Great Falls, for example, recently there was that big levy for the public library that passed. And that was something that people had to be convinced of, right? So if I were giving a public presentation with a report on why the library needs this funding, I would assume that my audience perhaps needed to be educated or needed to be persuaded, or maybe not super happy that I want to raise their taxes, right, to support the public library. And so I'd want to give them some reasons first before I went into, right, how I'm going to use all this money. I would talk about why this is needed, why this is necessary. We are going to focus on starting next week writing an informal report because writing a report to a boss, someone you know, someone you have a friendly, I hope, relationship with. So you can use a friendly, casual tone. You can use I. You can definitely use I when you start looking at your summary next time. You can use contractions. You can use shorter sentences and familiar words. And in fact, I want you to put the summary in that kind of conversational language. If there are some key terms that need to stay, right? As if they're medical terms, for example, if you're in nursing, of course, you're going to just use that specific term. But in terms of making recommendations for what the hospital, the clinic, or whatever you imagine you're working at, you could definitely use that conversational tone. The formal style, which is more like what you'll see if you're looking at a scientific article, for example, for next time, has that emphasis on objectivity, accuracy, and fairness. There's a professional distance between the writer and the reader. So there's not that kind of friendly relationship that's established. And it may use the third person. So the researcher interviewed 20 nurses in the first years of their careers to determine whatever, right? And there's an absence of humor, figures of speech, or editorializing. Again, there's not that level of familiarity, right, with the audience. So it's more formal. So we talk a little bit about report formats and the significance of headings. And we are going to be using headings starting next week. So we'll say a little bit about that. Report formats, as I said, can take a lot of different forms. We are going to specifically look at the memo. So I'm just going to mention that specifically. So for the memo, and we're going to aim for one page, single spaced with a kind of block format, single space paragraphs, one blank line between each paragraph, and with a memo header. And the reason that we want to use a memo is an internal document. It's something that is used within the company, right, to talk about policies or make announcements, or in this case, share information. It has regular margins. You don't need to change the margins on your Word document. You will, if you were doing this in real life, you would put your initials next to the from line. There's a from line, a subject line, and a date line. And that just means that you have kind of authorized this and put this forward, but you don't need to do that for our purposes from this time. And likely in real life, you would also maybe attach the memo to an email saying, here, attached, please see my memo about whatever. Just a quick message. We're not going to do that in class either. We're just going to focus on the memo report. The biggest thing that you're going to want to work on once you identify the article that you're going to use in weeks 9 and 10 is thinking about how can you chunk similar information into groups for quick comprehension. So I would say, for example, if you were looking at an article about nurses and burnout, if there are ultimately 3 causes and 4 recommendations for either avoiding burnout or getting people out of burnout, I would focus on that. Here are the causes, here are the potential solutions, right? And then which ones do you think would be most useful in your particular clinic or other setting, right, that you're talking about. And then we're also going to use headings to kind of help us chunk that information. So if the reader is looking at this quickly, they're like, oh, okay, I know I'm going to get causes and solutions, right? That's kind of what you want. You want it to be very easy to scan. The types of headings that you typically see in a scientific research paper are these functional headings on the far left of the screen. So executive summary, introduction, findings, discussion. And I'm going to suggest to you that you want to focus most on the findings and the discussion. There'll be a setup, might be called a literature review or background. That's going to be research that came before. It's probably not it's important to set up what they're doing in this particular article, but it's not so important in you giving takeaways, right, to the boss. So findings and discussion, really important parts to look at. And then there can be more informal headings. So instead of introduction, will smartphones replace PCs? They kind of already have. I think that's a mute point. But if you had a question like, what causes nurse burnout? Or under findings, burnout, how to prevent it and reduce it, something like that, right? Those things could be help you to set, right, what's the topic, kind of really quickly. And then they have on the far right side, these combination headings have both the kind of more functional piece like background, colon, and then the more talking piece, like how Apple won. So it's a combination. Usually when you have a colon, whatever's after it helps to clarify the first part, right? So I'm thinking of look at the third one here, production costs, colon, the investment is paying off. So this is telling me what to think about production costs, right? That they're actually worthwhile. So you could use any of these kinds of headings, just be consistent for whatever, with whatever headings you pick. So write short but clear headings. Think about how can you kind of really telegraph the who, what, when, where, why, and how. This is a lot like what we did the other week when you were looking at subject lines in emails, right? Just getting right to the point. You're going to have, I'm guessing, maybe around 3 headings on your one-page report. Maybe something to set up, what is the topic of this article? What is the findings? What's the discussion or the conclusion or your recommendations? Maybe 3 or 4, probably not more than that. Creating headings that are parallel. So maybe they're all nouns or they're all phrases or they're all formatted in the same way. And then we're going to take a look at another slide here about placement, size, and font. 3 levels of headings you're not going to have for our purposes, but I'll show you what that looks like because in a longer report that could be very useful. And actually, if you're reading an article that you find from the library database, you may very well see multiple levels of headings. So this is what they mean by levels, that this is the top level, highest level is the title, and it's centered and it's all caps. And then the first level heading is centered, but it's in title capitalization, so not every letter capitalized, but the first letter of each word. And then this is the second level heading, same capitalization, but it's to the left-hand margin. And then the third level heading is not bolded. I guess these are also bolded. And this one's not bolded into the left. So this means, for example, if you had findings and then you had a first finding and then that finding had 3 main points, right? You could have 3 subheadings. We're just going to have a title and this level of heading. But you can see if it's in a longer report that would really help to organize the information. It's like an outline. It's exactly like an outline. Identifying the problem that the report addresses, defining the report purpose, and collecting secondary and primary information to solve the problem is all things we do with reports. Our report that you're going to write is just going to have one source of information, which is going to be the article that you find. If you're writing a report that's solving a problem, start with the question, what can we do about the asbestos in the ceiling of the Havre Fire Department? And then statement of purpose to recommend a plan for solving this. Again, we're not going to use all these different kinds of data collection. We're really going to look at one article, but this is in the book too. This just gives you a good idea of all the different things you might be drawing on, right, for a report. There are some other kinds of short informational reports that describe routine tasks that I'm going to talk about because they're on the quiz, but they're not something that we're going to be actually doing ourselves. So a progress or interim report is literally relating where you're at in a specific project. So in a multi-year, for example, project, it'll be updates, right, on what's happening. So providing background information, describing the work completed thus far, and explaining the work currently in progress. Things often change a little bit as you're working on something, so you might give that kind of an update. And also, if anything's going to be different than predicted earlier in the future, right, to say that. So progress or interim report is in the middle of a project, giving an update. Summary, this is what we're going to be working on weeks 9 and 10, is to really boil it down to what are the main takeaways. And you're going to know that your audience is a boss. You can think about a boss you really had or your imagined ideal boss that you'll have in the future in your workplace, in your field, in your area. And you're going to tell them, what was this article about? What were the findings? What were the conclusions? And how does it relate to our hospital or our diesel shop, right? What should we do with this information? We're not going to put like illustrations and things like that in there. We're just hitting the main points. We already talked about using headings. You can absolutely use bulleted or numbered lists depending on, right, if there's that kind of information that is key information in the article. And I am asking you to include your reaction or overall evaluation for the boss, right? What should they know about what you think, right, about this article and its usefulness for your workplace? Some other short analytical reports that solve business problems include justification or recommendation reports. So a direct strategy for these would be to explain the problem or the need if we need to purchase something like that. Announce the recommendation, solution, or action concisely with active verbs. So what are the steps that we would need to do? Do we need to assess something first before we purchase something, etc.? Explain more fully the benefits of the recommendation or steps necessary to solve the problem, and include a discussion of pros, cons, and costs. If you're comparing several different possible solutions, right, that can really help show someone that the solution that you come to is the best, right, of the ones that are available. And then conclude the summary with the specific recommendation and necessary action. What's the next step we need to take? If you need to be indirect, and again, if you need to convince the audience that this is really a problem that needs to be solved, they don't already accept that it's a problem. First, you're going to start with that idea of the problem, describe the problem and your need or your need. Your recommendation addresses. So for example, in the fire department, the asbestos is literally falling down on the firefighters' heads. This is the health hazard. It's not just about the ceiling looking pretty or something like that. It's dangerous. So this is what I would talk about, the dangers. I'd have some background about dangers of asbestos and long-term health problems. Use those specific examples, supporting statistics and quotations to lend credibility, and discuss alternative solutions beginning with the least likely to succeed. So you're building up to, here's why this is the best problem. This is if you're going indirect route. Finally, you present your most promising alternative, show the advantages of your recommendation, summarize it, maybe state what the action steps are, and ask for authorization. Do they now agree, right, that this is a problem you need to address? Feasibility reports are about how feasible, right, or how realistic it is to do something. So if you start off with the recommendation, then provide a description of the background and problem, discuss the benefits of the proposal. So if I was going to say, we need to buy so many portable hotspots so that students have internet access on the weekends, I would discuss how this is going to be beneficial, any problems that may result, how are we going to make sure we keep track of these devices, et cetera? What are the costs going to be associated with this? And what's the time frame? How long would it take us to get them and to implement some kind of system to have them checked out and checked in and kept track of? Yardstick report is a little bit different in that it is actually measuring solutions against set criteria. So you're describing the problem or the need, explaining possible solutions and alternatives, and then establishing criteria for comparing them. So for example, I think Brad Pitt has a nonprofit, the name of which is escaping me, but it was to build housing in Louisiana after a hurricane. And he had some very specific criteria for how this housing needed to be built. One, he wanted it to be built green, and I don't mean painted green, but in an eco-friendly way. And two, and I thought this was smart, it needed to be built in a storm-resistant way, storm-resistant materials, because there's no point in building more housing and then it all gets destroyed in the next storm, right? So knowing that that's a criteria, you might buy more expensive materials, knowing that they're going to withstand the storm, instead of buying less expensive materials, because the criteria is storm resistant and eco-friendly, not cost alone, right? Sometimes we do operate on cost alone, but that's a good example of a time when there are other criteria that have been established for good reasons. You'll discuss and evaluate each alternative, so each choice of building materials in this case, based on the criteria, and then draw conclusions and recommendations. So they have this rule at the bottom of the page, are saying you're measuring each option up against those criteria that you've developed. Okay, thanks everybody. Have a good week, and next week I'll walk you through how to actually find an article for your project in the library database. So stay tuned for that.